The night before Thanksgiving at 55 years old I finally snapped. In the middle of the kitchen, I smashed the dinner that I had been making for more than 5 hours, plates, cutlery and all, and declared I was done. I was divorcing Carl. And the trigger? A grand Thanksgiving feast for the whole family. 16 dishes in total: roast turkey, honey-glazed ham, pumpkin pie, truffle mashed potatoes, baked yams, creamy corn chowder. I'd been on my feet since sunrise, elbows deep in prep work with no break, no help, and no one even offering to lift a finger. My back was stiff and throbbing, and just as I was kneading pie dough with flour-dusted hands, Carl's mother, Marjorie, shuffled into the kitchen like she owned the place. She picked up her tea mug and, with full entitlement, told me to fetch her some honey. She wanted warm lemon water with honey. I didn't even look up. "The honey's in the basket under the cabinet," I told her, still working the dough. "Just bend down and grab it." I wasn't harsh. If anything, after all that work I sounded remarkably calm. But she blew up instantly. "You know my back is bad," she snapped. "And you still expect me to bend down? Do you have any consideration?" A hot knot twisted in my chest. I couldn't help but mutter, "Maybe skip the honey then. Wouldn't want you to throw your back out." Before the words even cooled in the air, she slammed her mug into the sink with a loud crack. Porcelain shards flew everywhere. And something in me broke right along with that cup. She stood there with that sour face of hers, like the entire world owed her a favor. I stood frozen, hands still dusted in flour, caught somewhere between crouching and standing. From the living room, Carl and our son Evan came rushing in, finally stirred by the noise. For a split second I thought, maybe they'd ask if I was okay. Maybe they'd tell Marjorie to take it easy. But I should have known better. They didn't even glance at me. Carl scowled at the shattered mess in the sink like I'd committed a felony. "Abigail, what the hell is wrong with you? She's your elderly mother-in-law, and you're making her bend over to grab something? Have you no heart?" He said it like I'd done nothing all day but lounge around. Behind him stood Evan, still clutching his phone. Some influencer's chirpy voice was playing in the background. He barely looked up as he muttered, "Yeah, Mom, seriously. It was just honey. You were right there. Grandma's not in great shape. Why couldn't you help?" His tone chilled me, but what came next sliced right through me. "Do you have to make everything in this house feel like a soap opera? Look at Aunt Linda. She works full-time, takes care of the kids, does the chores, and she still looks put together and cheerful every damn day. You walk around like the world's done you wrong, dressed like you gave up years ago." I stared at him, silent. Couldn't find the words. I was standing near a slick puddle of chicken juice I hadn't even had time to mop up yet. Evan, still talking, helped Marjorie out of the kitchen, careful not to let her slip. And then, just to add insult, he grabbed my brand new apron and tossed it onto the floor as a mat for her to walk on. Right before he stepped out, he gave me one last glance, cold and dripping with judgment. And Carl, because he always had to have the last word, added, "You really ought to take a good look at yourself. It was supposed to be a happy holiday. No. Look at the mood you've created. My sister and her husband will be here any minute. How do you think it's going to look, you sitting here like this?" They stood there in the doorway, towering above me like courtroom judges. Me. I was still crouched on the floor, hands covered in flour, trying to gather up broken porcelain shards. The slippery edges kept slicing at my fingers, one cut after another. I was exhausted beyond words, drowning in tasks and resentment, and still, no one even offered me a moment to breathe. I stared at the cracks between the kitchen tiles for several long minutes, my eyes stinging and dry until the tears blurred my vision. My hands were too filthy to wipe them away, so I rubbed at my face with the edge of my sleeve. The reflection in the glass cabinet door showed a woman smeared with turkey grease and flecks of seasoning, hair clinging to her cheeks in messy strands. I looked like a ghost who'd been chained to the stove for decades. But Carl and Evan didn't see it. And they wouldn't have cared even if they had. All they cared about was that elderly woman who could sit for hours straight playing bridge but thought bending down for honey was too much effort. Not one of them gave a damn that I'd been up since 4 in the morning, roasting pumpkins, chopping vegetables, kneading dough for dessert. No one cared that I hadn't even had a single bite to eat. While they sat down to enjoy the meal, I didn't join them at the table. I crouched alone in the corner of the kitchen, alone in silence. It wasn't that I wasn't hungry. I just couldn't bear to sit with them. I remembered once, during dinner, I made a little too much noise sipping my soup. Carl, in all his self-proclaimed glory as a former music major, immediately frowned and looked at me like I'd committed some unspeakable offense. Right there in front of everyone he said, "That slurping noise is the most grating sound I've ever heard. Like nails on a chalkboard." I never ate at the table with them again. But they never seemed to notice. The three of them carried on every morning, chatting over breakfast about international politics and art pieces I couldn't care less about. They called themselves educated middle class. Carl used to teach music at a public middle school. Evan, despite never having consistent gigs, fancied himself a freelance writer. And Marjorie constantly reminded everyone she'd retired from some local performance troupe, like she was still the town's cultural treasure. Me. I was just the girl from a small town who grew up thinking she'd work at the local care facility after high school. Decent pay, steady hours. But then I fell in love, chose marriage, and spent the next 30 years stuck between the stove and the laundry room. Sure, over the years I picked up some sewing work, making custom quilts and placemats for the neighbors. I earned a few $100s each month, maybe more on good months. But to them it was just a silly hobby. Something barely worth mentioning. But let me tell you, this so-called housewife job, it was anything but easy. Take breakfast, for example. Carl insisted on his low-carb nonsense. Grilled chicken breast with quinoa. Evan wanted something heavy like buttered scrambled eggs and toast. Marjorie demanded her oatmeal cooked down to mush. That meant 3 burners going at once, 3 trips to the fridge every morning. Sometimes I'd be cutting fabric for an order while cooking, and if I lost track of time, something would burn. And what did I get in return? Not a single word of understanding. Just Carl sneering, "You can't even handle this? What else are you good for besides eating?" Marjorie would chime in right on cue, "Could you please not look so miserable all the time? First thing in the morning and I already lose my appetite looking at you." And Evan? He just sat there scrolling on his phone, pretending he didn't hear a thing. Like it was perfectly normal for a mother to be treated like that. Over the years I heard so many cruel words I started to believe them. Maybe I really was useless. Maybe I wasn't good enough, couldn't cook right, couldn't clean right, wasn't smart or capable enough. But then I realized, no matter how hard I tried, they always found something to criticize. The soup was too bland. The meat was too dry. Even the way I mopped the floor wasn't good enough. Again and again they treated me like a servant who could never quite meet their standards. And somehow, in all those cycles of scolding and disappointment, I stumbled into the final month of another year. That's when it hit me. I'd been running this household for 30 years. 30 years. I looked down at my hands, dried and rough from decades of detergent and hot water, and one thought kept echoing in my mind: what more do they want from me? By the time they finished eating and set down their forks, I finally came out of that fog. I rushed to clear the plates, thinking I should at least grab a bite to keep myself going. But the big pot of water for the barbecue prep had already started to boil over on the stove. I had no choice. I set the dishes down, turned around, and went right back to cooking. Hours slipped by in a blur, and by the time I looked up again, the kitchen clock was pointing straight at 3 in the afternoon. My stomach twisted like someone had reached in and grabbed it with both fists. Cold sweat trickled down my spine in waves. And yet, the cooking was nowhere near done. Marjorie's 2 daughters were driving in from out of state with their families for a big Thanksgiving reunion. The moment she heard the news, her face lit up like Christmas morning. She didn't waste a second before declaring that we'd need a full 16-course dinner, all chosen by her, of course. Roast turkey, honey-glazed ham, truffle mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, baked green beans with cheese. The list just kept going. There was no way I could handle all that by myself. A knot formed in my chest and I turned to Carl, thinking maybe, just maybe, I could suggest ordering takeout this year. Just lighten the load a little. But the second our eyes met, his face turned dark. In the 30 years we'd been married, he hadn't taught me much, but one thing I'd mastered was reading his moods. That grim, thunderous looks at everything. I didn't need him to speak. He wouldn't allow it. So I bit my tongue and nodded. Agreed to do it all. But I'm not made of steel. Pulling off a full holiday feast single-handedly is a nightmare. Just prepping the turkey and the giant slab of ham had my back screaming. And there were still a dozen more dishes to go. Time was slipping through my fingers. The kitchen was hot enough to make my scalp prickle, my heart racing like a trapped animal. And Marjorie? Not only did she not lift a finger, she made everything worse. Ask her to grab the honey herself and she'd throw a tantrum and shatter a mug. Carl and Evan were no better. They didn't help. They didn't calm her down. Instead, they turned on me as if I were the problem. Right then, something inside me clicked. It didn't matter if I served this family for 30 years or 50. They would never be satisfied. I wasn't family to them. I was just a subpar maid who kept failing to meet expectations. They could sit out in the living room laughing and scrolling through their phones, chatting about Thanksgiving plans, completely detached. Not once did it cross their minds that I was back here sweating, starving, and walking on eggshells, just trying not to mess anything up. And the truth is, I'd had enough. Absolutely enough. In the living room, Marjorie was planted on that old leather couch with Carl and Evan flanking her on either side, coaxing her like she was a fussy toddler. I didn't need to get any closer to hear what they were saying. It was always the same recycled nonsense. Carl started first, voice soft like he didn't want to disturb the peace. Mom, don't let it get to you. Abigail never had much education. You can't expect her to understand where you're coming from. Half the time she can barely string together a proper sentence. Evan chimed in immediately like he needed to justify himself. Yeah, Grandma, don't upset yourself. All she knows is how to cook and do laundry. It's not worth stressing over. Aunt Linda's coming soon. If you're still fuming, they're just gonna say you're wrinkling faster from all the tension. Their little performance seemed to work. Marjorie's expression slowly began to ease. But of course she wasn't done. She launched into the same tired refrain she'd been repeating for decades. You know, I told you back then, Linda would have been a better match. And now look where you are. You just had to marry someone like Abigail. Uncultured, combative. I ask her to help and she throws a fit. Bravo, Carl. Carl opened his mouth to say something else, but I didn't care to hear it. I didn't even bother to look at his face. I already knew what came next, probably a sigh followed by, marrying her was the biggest mistake of my life. He'd said it before, and every time I stayed silent, he took it as my admission of guilt. I said nothing. I turned back into the kitchen, slammed the processed turkey into a basin, tore off my apron and marched straight to the bedroom. I locked the door behind me. From under the wardrobe, I dragged out the 2 battered suitcases I'd had for over a decade. One was already packed. Clothes, winter boots, hand cream, and my old-school flip phone. The last scrap of defiance in a world full of smartphones. At the very bottom was a stash of cash I'd been tucking away for years. A little over $1,400, saved bit by bit from quilt orders. I stared at the clothes I'd packed, dull, lifeless grays and blacks. My mind blanked. I couldn't even remember the last time I bought myself something with color. Then it came back to me. It was years ago, after an incident with Linda. We'd shown up to a neighborhood potluck wearing the same bright purple dress. Mine fit better, no question. But Carl had been furious. He sulked the entire evening, and afterward he snapped at me, "You're in your 40s, for God's sake. Don't you think that color is ridiculous? Embarrassing. You really think you can compete with her?" I had just turned 40. My skin had lost some glow, sure, but I was far from too old to wear florals or bold colors. Still, his next words crushed me. "Stop dressing like you're headed to a prom." I folded the dress away for good that night. From then on, my closet turned into a graveyard of navy, charcoal, and black. God, I'd been so foolish. I combed through the wardrobe one last time, made sure I hadn't missed anything, then opened the bedroom door. They weren't in the living room anymore. Probably upstairs. I didn't care to find out. I wheeled the suitcase to the front door, then went back for the empty one. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge and started filling it with everything I could. The turkey I just bought that morning, the lobster, the sausages, mushrooms, fresh vegetables, packed neatly into bags and stacked tightly in the suitcase. If I could carry it, it went in. As for the leftover juice and salads, I left them behind. But I didn't forget the honey. On the fridge's top shelf was a small jar of wild honey I'd had shipped from Maine, part of a set of 5 I'd spent weeks trying to track down. Pure raw honey. I'd bought them for Carl, hoping the tea would help soothe his stomach issues. Turns out he'd secretly given 3 jars to Linda behind my back. Back then I still had the energy to argue. I asked him why and he barked at me, "Everything in this house belongs to me. I'll give it to whoever I damn well please. Don't like it? Then leave. No one's stopping you." That's when it hit me, this marriage had never really included me. I was just something that came along for the ride. Convenient. Replaceable. I'd been toying with the idea of leaving for years, but the moment I truly made up my mind was the day my sister came to visit. She tried to talk me out of it. Told me I was too old to be making waves. You're past the halfway mark. Why put yourself through all that? What'll people say? I looked her straight in the eye and said, I'm not afraid. So she shifted tactics, brought up Evan. He's not even married yet. If you leave now in the middle of all this with assets to divide and everything, how's he supposed to find someone? No woman wants to step into a broken home. Evan was my son. I raised him myself. And even though he'd grown cold and cruel, a mother's heart doesn't switch off just like that. I hesitated. She sensed it and pressed harder. Just wait a few more years. Once he's settled down, you can go your separate ways. Wouldn't that be easier? And I stupidly agreed. I've often wondered if those 5 years were wasted. Maybe. But I also know they were enough to drain every last drop of hope I had left. Now finally I'm done hoping. I'm ready to live for me. Evan and Marjorie burst through the front door, laughing about something I didn't care enough to hear. They flopped onto the couch like nothing in the world existed beyond the three of them. Neither of them glanced in my direction, let alone noticed the 2 fully packed suitcases by my side. They pulled out their phones and dove into their social media feeds as if I were just another piece of the furniture. Carl walked in last, carrying a large foam cooler. He set it down on the dining table and finally looked at me. His eyes paused for just a second, long enough to register my presence, but then slipped right back into that familiar expression of superiority. He frowned and barked. These are Australian crabs, just delivered. I want them all steamed. Get moving and don't drag your feet like you always do. They'll be here for dinner soon. So that's what they'd been doing, picking up a delivery. I looked at Carl and for once my voice didn't carry the usual tone of submission. It was cold and flat. That dinner? You won't be having it tonight. Carl blinked, thrown off. Then instinctively he raised his voice. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Stop standing there and get cooking. I met his eyes and said slowly and clearly, this is not my job. I'm not doing it. He stared at me like the words made no sense. What did you just say? I said your cook has officially quit. So if you're hungry, go find something to eat yourself. With that, I swept a stack of plates off the table. The crash silenced the entire room. The foam box hit the floor with a dull thud, seafood spilling in every direction. Crabs skittered under the rug and the sharp tang of fish filled the air. Evan and Marjorie gasped in unison. The look in their eyes was pure disbelief, like they were seeing a stranger wear my face. A shard of glass sliced across Carl's hand and blood welled up instantly. Gritting his teeth, he roared, Abigail Dawson, have you lost your damn mind? Do you even know what you're doing? If you don't want to live in this house anymore, then get the hell out, right now. I stared at the twisted rage on his face, my own voice calm, almost icy. You're right. I don't want to live here. Not for one more second. As soon as the government offices open after the holiday, we're filing for divorce. I didn't wait for anyone to respond. I grabbed the handles of my suitcases and headed for the door. Behind me someone shouted. A cup clattered to the floor. I knew then they finally understood. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a performance. This was real. Evan ran after me and yanked one suitcase from my hand. Standing in the doorway, he glared at me. Mom, what the hell is wrong with you? You're really gonna pull this stunt on Thanksgiving? You trying to embarrass us in front of the whole neighborhood? Just go back inside. Stop making a scene. He stood tall in the sunset, the light casting sharp angles across his face. He looked so much like Carl, same jawline, same eyes, same disdain. And for the first time I saw it clearly, I had failed as a mother. I raised this boy. But that old saying, the child favors whoever raises him, had never once applied to us. I couldn't even remember when he started pulling away. Was it the way Carl belittled me in front of him, mocking me for burning dinner? Was it Marjorie's constant refrain that marrying Abigail was the worst decision in this family's history? Or was it the daily chorus of commands, hurry up, stop dawdling? Too many moments to count. Over the years, Evan had absorbed their scorn like it was scripture. He no longer saw me as a person, just the lowest-ranking servant in his childhood home. That quiet contempt had seeped into his bones. I wasn't going back. I wasn't swallowing one more insult. I yanked the suitcase out of his grip, my voice as sharp as a winter wind. You've always thought I was an embarrassment? Well, congratulations. You never have to be embarrassed by me again. I'm gone. Evan opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but then Marjorie's voice rang out from inside the house. Let her go. I want to see how someone like her plans to survive out in the real world. Her face, lit by the hallway lamp, was hollow and angular, her cheekbones jutting out like blades. Her lips curled as she spat the words, and something about the way her mouth twitched sent a chill down my spine. I'd never thought she looked scary before. But now, with her eyes narrowed and voice dripping with venom, she gave me the kind of cold dread I couldn't shake. Evan hesitated but didn't move. Marjorie snorted behind him. She's been threatening to leave for years. Always makes a big fuss and then crawls right back. She's a drama queen, nothing more. Don't waste your breath. And just like that, Evan slowly backed into the house, his expression full of indifference. That's when Carl appeared again, storming through the doorway, blood still dripping from his hand. Why the hell are you just standing there? Can't you see I'm bleeding? Get back inside and get the damn first aid kit. The old me would have rushed back in a heartbeat, pulled out the iodine and gauze, knelt on the floor and bandaged him up without a word. But not anymore. I gave him a single glance, flat, unbothered, and walked out the front door, dragging both suitcases behind me, leaving behind the house I'd lived in for 30 long years. At some point the rain had started to fall, thin, sharp and cold. The wind whipped it against my face like needles, stinging with every gust. I pulled my hood tighter and kept walking, head down, suitcase wheels dragging through puddles and slick piles of wet leaves. The house faded behind me as I reached the main road at the edge of town. Mud splashed up my pant legs, rain mixed with dirt soaking into the fabric. And then, smack, something landed in a puddle ahead of me, splattering mud up my shins. I froze. Looked down. My heart skipped. It was a photo. Framed. I knew it instantly. The one photo of Carl and me, taken just 2 months after we got our marriage certificate. The only formal picture we ever had as husband and wife in 30 years. I'd kept it carefully wrapped in cloth, hidden in the back of a drawer. I never displayed it, but I'd take it out sometimes just to remind myself that once there'd been something worth remembering. Carl knew I cared about that photo. Whenever our fights spiraled out of control, he'd dig it out and throw it to the floor, a silent threat that always worked. It became Pavlovian. Whenever he raised the frame, I'd fall quiet, fall back in line. That photo became a trigger for my submission. But this time he'd played the same move one too many times. And this time it didn't land. I stood in the rain, watching the photo soak through, its colors bleeding, the image dissolving until it sank to the bottom of the puddle like a washed-out page from an old diary, illegible, unrecoverable. I didn't flinch. My heart didn't race. Of course it didn't. Hearts aren't made of concrete. Even the strongest armor cracks when it's hammered long enough. Life isn't supposed to be a battlefield where two people keep each other hostage. For 30 years I rose early and worked until dark to care for that man and his son. And not once, did I hear, "Thank you. You've worked so hard." They only ever noticed if I burned the rice, undersalted the soup, missed a spot on the floor. Respect? It never existed in that house. Truth was, that photo wasn't even the original anymore. Years ago Carl had smashed it so hard it fell into the sink, ruined beyond repair. I went to 3 photo shops around town just to have it restored. It looked the same, but it wasn't. Not really. Just like our marriage. I'd been patching it together for years, believing that if I just tried hard enough I could make it whole again. But now the photo was gone, and so was the last of my hope. I grabbed my suitcase and kept walking. The rain picked up, wheels dragging sluggishly through puddles, my shoes soaked through. But I didn't stop. Carl probably didn't think I'd really leave. He was likely raging inside, putting on a show for the neighbors. Fine. You want to leave? Great. First thing after the holiday we'll sign those divorce papers. Let's see how long you last out there on your own. He was probably yelling himself hoarse. Abigail Dawson. You come crawling back, I won't take you in. Go ahead, starve on the streets for all I care. I almost laughed. How did I stay married to that temperamental, self-obsessed man for 30 years? His pride always mattered more than my pain. His image always trumped my dignity. He never once stopped to ask why I'd reached my breaking point, only how he looked because of it. Something crashed inside the house. Probably another bowl or chair knocked over in a tantrum. Maybe they'd realized by now that I'd taken the food too. Regret must be sinking in. But the funniest part? Not one of them came after me. They'd rather stay in their warm, well-lit home while their unpaid domestic worker braved the cold and the storm. Of course they wouldn't chase me. That would require effort. Through the cracked window I heard Marjorie's voice, sharp and shrill. Go bring her back. She took the whole damn dinner. What are we supposed to eat? Crackers. But Carl and Evan? Same as always, each waiting for the other to move. Neither of them lifted a finger. Outside, the holiday spirit was in full swing. Porch lights blinked on one by one. Down the block, music drifted from a speaker outside the corner store. Some cheerful Thanksgiving tune with the occasional pop of a popcorn machine in the background. The air smelled like cinnamon, firecrackers, and wet leaves. It was the scent of celebration, of warmth. But none of it belonged to me. The street was empty. Just me and the rain. Everyone else was inside, gathered around dinner tables, laughing in golden lamplight. And I, out here soaked and alone, was like a character who'd been written out of the script, cut from the story entirely. Only this time I didn't want back in. I wasn't going to play their part anymore. I walked past the edge of town and turned onto the road that led to the city. It was an old two-lane highway, worn and slick under the cold rain. The sky hung low and heavy, casting everything in a dull gray that pressed against the earth like a weight. I stood by the roadside, 2 suitcases at my feet, waiting for a car. Any car that could take me away from this place. Most people would have pulled out their phones by now, called an Uber or a Lyft. But not me. Carl used to say I couldn't do anything, and honestly he wasn't completely wrong. I barely touched Facebook. Instagram confused me. I'd never even watched a single video on TikTok, let alone figured out how to order takeout or hail a ride through an app. The phone I was holding wasn't even mine originally. It was Evan's old model, passed down to me last year when he finally got tired of calling me hopeless. I'd spent these years drifting, so slowly I didn't even notice the world moving on without me. There was a time when just stepping out to the roadside meant a few carpool vans would pull over, offering a lift without asking too many questions. But now, even waving down a ride felt like something out of a different era. I waited. And waited. Not a single car passed. A flicker of panic rose in my chest. Of course. It was Thanksgiving. Most drivers were probably at home, carving turkey and sipping wine with their families. Who would be out on the road, picking up strangers on a day like this? Then again, adulthood has no holidays. Someone somewhere is always working because they have no other choice. Maybe my luck hadn't entirely run out. A yellow cab finally appeared in the distance, its wipers squeaking back and forth as it cut through the rain. Its headlights glowed softly through the mist, twin orbs of calm that lit the pavement in front of me. My pulse slowed. The panic began to fade beneath the steady rhythm of rain. I exhaled, a hint of relief forming in my chest. Then the cab door opened and all that relief vanished. Out stepped Linda Brooks. Linda had been my classmate in grade school. She was also Carl's college girlfriend. Her mother had forced them apart, claiming Carl was too poor to be worth her daughter's time. Not long after, Linda was introduced to a wealthy building materials tycoon, and married off out of state. But fate hadn't been kind to her either. After giving birth to one daughter, she developed health complications, then got divorced. She raised the child on her own for years. Eventually, life looped her right back to our little town. Her daughter married a local man whose parents passed away young, leaving a baby with no one to care for. Linda moved in to help. Now that her grandson was in preschool, Linda had taken to the city life again. She dressed like a downtown executive, commuting in and out with the confidence of a woman who'd never known struggle. Every morning she'd strut past my house in heels, tapping across the brick-paved sidewalk, calling her rideshare. Every evening she'd return with her handbag swinging and her chin held high. She always glanced my way with that look. That smug, glassy-eyed glance that said, "Look how well I've done for myself." Like she was soaking in the sight of me behind the kitchen window, apron smeared, hair pulled back, watching her bask in daylight. Truth be told, I wasn't jealous of her. In some ways, I even respected her. Raising a child alone takes guts. That kind of resilience doesn't come easy. But what always stuck with me were her words. The kind that sounded refined but hit like a slap. And every now and then she'd put on that faux regretful voice and say things like, "You know, if my mother hadn't interfered back then, you never would have ended up with Carl." The audacity. She and Carl were cut from the same cloth. Every sentence dressed like small talk but laced with blades, always aiming for the softest parts of your heart. I knew exactly what her game was. It wasn't about Carl. It wasn't about me. It was about presence, about reminding me once again that she stood taller. That I was the one still crawling. Well, it really is you, Abigail, she said, stepping in front of me, her voice as sugary sweet as ever, laced with that familiar fake concern. Towing all those suitcases on Thanksgiving. What's the occasion? Moving out. I didn't respond. She chuckled softly like she had a private joke I wouldn't get. Don't tell me it's about those jars of honey Carl dropped off the other day? Oh, Abigail, really, you let that get to you? You're just too sensitive. I mean, you're not like me. You don't have a job. You've got no income. No clue how the real world works. You walk out on Carl. What exactly are you planning to live on? Air. I looked up at her. Her makeup was flawless. She wore a crimson wool coat that cinched perfectly at the waist, a fitted dress underneath, and tall black boots that gleamed despite the weather. Her leather handbag swung neatly from her wrist. She looked like one of those powerful women you see on TV dramas. Every heel click on the cobbled sidewalk echoing like she was too big for this little town. But I knew better. The sharpness in her wasn't pride born of achievement. It was the kind of smugness that came from never letting go of the need to feel superior to me. She stood in the rain, eyes sliding over me like I was some soggy mess scraped off the sidewalk. Her voice was still coated in syrup, artificial and cloying. I stood in my rain-soaked parka, the hood knocked askew by the wind, water dripping steadily from the ends of my hair. But for once I didn't feel cold at all. I looked her in the eye and said, calm as still water, you're right. I'm not like you. She blinked just for a moment, caught off guard. I'm not the type to play dress up for the world and scheme behind closed doors. You spend every ounce of your energy looking like a success, but let's not pretend you got where you are by grit alone. After your divorce, your family caught you when you fell. You flashed a few smiles and someone handed you a job. You walk around this town like you're too good to look anyone in the eye. I stepped closer and glanced down at her polished boots before letting out a soft, dry laugh. I'm not built like that. I stayed home all these years and let life wear me down. But I raised my son. I looked after Carl's mother for 3 decades. From scrubbing dishes to fixing leaky faucets, from midnight fevers to grocery runs in snowstorms. I did it all. I may not know how to work your fancy apps or stage an office selfie with the caption, "So busy today," but I know how to live a real life. One I built with my own hands. She opened her mouth again, probably to deliver another slick remark, but I didn't let her. I don't have your polish or your charm, but I know who I am. I know what I can do. You. I tilted my head. All you know how to do is look down on people and pretend you're living a life no one else can touch. But deep down you're still clinging to an image. That's not strength, it's theater. The fake smile slid off her face, and what replaced it was colder than the wind and rain around us. I didn't care. I turned from her, grabbed my suitcase handles and walked toward the waiting cab. Before I climbed in, I glanced back at her one last time and said quietly, "You think I won't survive without Carl. But the truth is, this is the first time I've ever really started to live, and it feels great." The car door closed with a soft, final thud. And just like that, it felt like I'd said goodbye to the woman I used to be. The city streetlights shimmered like stars caught in the rain, dim and golden but steady. I gave the driver an address. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror and asked kindly, "Just moved?" I nodded. I didn't offer anything more. Grace had been my neighbor years ago. She used to tell me, over fences and front steps, that I shouldn't spend my whole life cooped up inside that house. She'd invited me more than once to come work with her, said I deserved better than a life stuck behind a stove. We hadn't kept in close touch, but I knew she was still working at a senior care center. She was one of those rare people, gentle and loyal to the core. She lived alone now in a modest 2-bedroom on the edge of the city. Her husband passed away young and both her children had moved out of state for work. That extra room had been empty for years. She'd always said, "If the day ever comes that you need to leave, it's yours. No questions asked." I never thought that day would actually arrive. When she opened the door, she had an apron on and a skillet in hand. She stared at me for 3 seconds, soaking wet, suitcase in one hand, rain dripping from my coat, and then pulled me inside without a word. She handed me a towel and said with a soft laugh, "I knew this day would come. I'm just glad you made it." I smiled even as my nose stung and my eyes burned. That night over dinner we talked. I told her everything, The years I'd spent trapped in that house, how exhausted I was, how lonely. She didn't sigh or look away. She just listened, and when I was done, she reached across the table, gave my hand a gentle squeeze and said, "You should have left a long time ago. But I'm glad you finally did. It's not too late." The next morning she brought me to the care center where she worked. "We've got an opening for an assistant caregiver," she said. "You don't need a license, just some training. It's mostly companionship and light cleaning." I looked at her, half joking. "You're not worried I can't even work a smartphone?" He waved me off. "You're kind, you're a great cook, you pay attention to people. And you actually listen when someone talks. That means more than knowing how to swipe through an app." I nodded. Said I'd try. I didn't expect much. But on my very first day, an elderly woman grabbed my hand and wouldn't let go. She said I reminded her of her little sister who'd passed away decades ago. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't seen before. Every ounce of patience I'd learned in that kitchen, every quiet skill honed over 30 years of unnoticed work, had finally become something of value. Something I could survive on. Something that belonged to me. After work, back at Grace's place, I unpacked a box I hadn't touched in years, full of the patchwork pieces I'd sewn in my spare moments between chores and chaos. There were small quilted purses, fabric aprons, hand-stitched pillow covers, all made with quiet care, the kind of detail only visible when you looked closely. Grace's eyes widened as she picked up a little handbag. "Abigail, these are beautiful. You've been making these all this time and only selling them at street markets? Have you ever thought about posting them online? You'd get way more orders." I gave her a sheepish smile. I never had the time. There was always something at home that needed me more. She pulled out a chair and sat down beside me, already opening her laptop. "Trust me, this stuff is made for the internet. Etsy is basically a heaven for people who know how to make things with their hands." I frowned. "Grace, I barely know how to check my bank account, let alone run an online shop." "Then I'll teach you," she said, snapping the laptop shut with a grin. "First we set up your account. Everything else we can figure out step by step." So that's what we did. She showed me how to create a profile, upload photos, write product descriptions and set prices. I fumbled my way through it all, but Grace just laughed. "You're picking this up faster than I did back in the day." That night I sewed 3 little coin purses, snapped a few photos and listed them online. The next morning when I woke up, there was a notification from Etsy. My first order. My heart leapt. It thudded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, faster than the first time I ever held Evan in my arms. I stared at the screen, blinking through tears. My phone trembled in my hands. Grace's voice floated in from the kitchen. "Breakfast's ready." I sniffled, wiped my eyes quickly and called back, "Coming." That meal tasted better than anything I'd eaten in years. That night, tucked into the small guest room at Grace's, I opened her old notebook and wrote my very first entry. I don't know what the future looks like. But I know one thing, starting today this life finally belongs to me. I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, and for the first time in decades I felt solid. Steady. Home. On the 3rd day after I left, I got the first call from Carl's family. It was his sister, Carla, her voice strained with awkward politeness. "Hey Abigail, how've you been lately? Things at home have been, well, a little chaotic since you left. Thanksgiving dinner was, kind of a mess." I let out a quiet chuckle. "Oh, you mean the one where no one wiped the table, the turkey was burnt, the kids were rolling on the floor, and the elderly were groaning about their backs." She paused for a few seconds. "So, you're really not coming back?" "No," I said gently but firmly. "I'm really not. And if you don't mind, tell your brother it's time he learned how to take care of himself." I hung up, not with triumph but with a strange, quiet release. As if, for the first time, I fully understood. This family couldn't even make it through a holiday meal without me. Later, Grace brought home the full scoop, collected in bits and pieces from town gossip. Apparently, Carl's house on Thanksgiving had been an unmitigated disaster. Marjorie spent the afternoon grumbling in the living room, complaining that the unwiped floors made her feet slip and the lack of food aromas ruined her appetite. Carl tried to calm her down, only to walk into the kitchen and find a single scorched pot of chestnut pumpkin soup still bubbling on the stove. Evan stood in front of it, completely bewildered. "Didn't you say you just add water and heat it up?" Carl snapped. "How would you know what's what?" That was the leftover stock Abigail made last week. You just dumped water in it. Well, she never let me do anything in the kitchen, Evan shot back. Marjorie heard the argument and banged her hand against the arm of the chair. What did I tell you? That woman does not deserve it. Relatives started trickling in just then and the whole house froze in tension. No food on the table. Smoke in the kitchen. An elderly woman yelling in the living room while father and son bickered like toddlers. Carla, standing awkwardly at the door, gave a half-hearted smile. Did we come at a bad time? Right on cue, Linda walked in, all poise and timing, carrying 2 boxes of pastries, just for Carl to try. She took in the disaster scene with wide, delighted eyes, but didn't say a word. Carl was slumped on the couch, face stormy and silent. Linda sat beside him, her voice suddenly soft. Don't take it too hard. Life goes on, with or without people. If you really need a hand, I'm in town for a while. I can help you get through this stretch. By help, of course she meant she moved in. Grace told me the whole story after work, peeling off her scarf and kicking off her shoes like she couldn't wait to deliver the gossip. You want to guess what Linda's been up to since moving in? She's not cleaning, that's for sure. First thing she did was take Marjorie to her friend's spa for a facial. Then she replaced all the honey you left in the fridge, swapped it out like it never existed. I laughed quietly, still stitching the edges of a fabric pillow. Linda's never been the type to take a loss quietly. Grace smirked. And she's been real chatty too. The girls at lunch said she's been going around saying you're ungrateful, too emotional, and too old to be throwing tantrums. It's all digs, just disguised in that sweet voice of hers. I looked up at Grace and said, calm and clear, then maybe she should try a shift at the care center. See what it's like for an emotional aging woman to earn her own paycheck. Grace burst out laughing. That night, I sat at Grace's desk, the glow of the laptop casting a pale light across the room. On the screen were 4 bold words: Legal Aid Services. My fingers hovered over the mouse, tracing tiny, nervous circles as I stared at the application form. I began typing: name, contact, length of marriage, household circumstances. I reached the final question. My mouse hovered above the submit button. Then my phone lit up beside me. A message from Evan. Mom, how long are you planning to drag this out? I stared at the words, felt the familiar sting in my chest. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned back to the screen and clicked submit. Kelsey, the attorney assigned to my case, was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed, fast-talking, and laser-focused. She listened as I told her everything. The unpaid decades, the care work, the meals, the silence, the sacrifice. When I was done, she said, 30 years of unpaid labor, elder care, and full-time child rearing. That absolutely qualifies as grounds for spousal support and an equitable division of assets. We can file for property division and negotiate for a share of continued living expenses. I nodded slowly. It's not about the money. I just need closure. A way to make it real. For myself. Kelsey smiled gently. That's what we're here for. Not revenge, fairness. 3 days after the divorce petition was filed, Carl called. His voice was low, tightly wound with anger. Abigail, you really want to go down this road? You want to blow the whole thing up? My voice stayed calm. You blew it up a long time ago. I just stopped pretending it was whole. He scoffed, bitter and loud. What kind of woman does this to her own family? After everything I've done for you. I looked out the window. The morning sun was creeping up behind the buildings, golden and slow. You didn't do anything to me, Carl. That's the point. You just stopped seeing me a long time ago. He didn't know what to say to that. I could hear him breathing hard through the phone, then the line went dead. Evan showed up a week later. He stood outside the senior care center where I worked, wearing a rumpled hoodie and that nervous half-smile he always put on when he didn't know what to say. Hey, I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to see you. I brought him inside, sat him down in the break room, poured him a glass of warm water. He looked around, eyes landing on the colorful quilted wall hangings, the bright patchwork pillows on the sofa. You made all this? I nodded. He blinked. I thought, you only knew how to cook. I smiled faintly. That's what your father always said. That didn't make it true. He didn't argue. Just sat there holding the cup, turning it in his hands. The house is a mess, he said quietly. It all kind of fell apart when you left. I stayed silent. He stared at the water in his glass. Do you really have to go through with the divorce? I studied his face. The hesitation, the fatigue, the small crack in his certainty. Then I said, your father doesn't know how to run a washing machine. Tell me, do you think someone like that is worth the rest of my life? That hit him like a slap. He dropped his gaze and didn't speak again. I knew in that moment that something in him had shifted. Not because of anything I'd said, but because he'd finally started to live without the woman he'd always taken for granted. Still, his awakening didn't move me. Not anymore. That version of me, the one who waited for understanding, who hoped for someone else's validation, she was gone. And I didn't miss her. I never imagined the divorce process would move so smoothly. Kelsey was sharp and efficient while Carl, true to form, dragged his feet. It wasn't that he wasn't worried. He was. But deep down he still didn't believe I could actually go through with it. Not all the way. In his eyes, I was still that apron-clad woman with a grocery basket in one hand and a soup ladle in the other. Without him I'd be like a dry bean in an empty pot. No heat, no sound, no value. But he was wrong. Once I was out of that house, truly out, I realized something I hadn't dared believe for years. I was never incapable of living a good life. I'd just never been given the space to try. One afternoon I walked into a small shoe store downtown and took my time browsing. For the first time in 3 decades I was picking out a pair of shoes for no one but myself. For the past 30 years, every pair I'd owned had either been one of Carl's discount finds, or hand-me-downs from Marjorie, shoes she'd declared still perfectly wearable. I'd smiled, thanked them, and worn what I was given. But that week I'd sold over 10 handcrafted items at the weekend market. My little patchwork purses and decorative pillow covers had done better than I ever expected, and I had money, my money. So I bought a pair of soft brown leather flats. Nothing fancy. Nothing loud. Just comfortable, well-made, and mine. When I slipped them on, it felt like wrapping my tired, calloused feet in a quiet kind of dignity. Standing there in the store window's reflection, I saw a woman who wasn't settling, wasn't saving for someone else, wasn't scraping by. I saw someone who was finally spending money not for survival, but for self-worth. And I knew I would walk into my new life in those shoes. Work at the care center was settling into a rhythm too. I was no longer just assisting with meals or cleaning rooms. I'd started helping organize weekly activities. By now, Tuesday afternoon's quilting class had become the most popular event on the calendar. Some of the ladies even fought over who got to sit closest to me, insisting I teach them that little French-style edge you do on your fabric flowers. I laughed with them, but inside my heart ached in a way that surprised me. I'd spent decades sewing pillowcases and quilts for Carl and his mother, one stitch at a time, always meticulous, never once heard a thank you. But now here I was, and these same hands, this same quiet skill, was not only being seen but celebrated. But turned into something that supported me. Something that gave me a future. That night, back at Grace's place, I sat on the couch watching the Etsy platform ping with new views, new bookmarks, new little notifications like the soft tick of possibility. And suddenly, I remembered something Carl had said to me years ago, after I'd burned a pan of rice while fixing Marjorie's tea. What else can you even do, Abigail, besides cook? I looked at the screen, then down at my hands, steady, worn, and finally free. And I smiled. Because now I had the answer. I can use these hands to build a life. I can use these hands to earn my own way. I can, and I am, feeding myself, with more than food. Unlike the quiet resurrection taking place in my own life, Carl's house had begun to sound like an old machine sputtering on its last breath. Erratic, noisy, and painfully out of sync. Word around town was that Marjorie's health had been steadily declining. Carl couldn't keep up. The house was a mess. Garbage piled up at the back door. The washing machine sat stuffed with damp laundry left for days. The kitchen sink was full of unwashed dishes, soaking in stagnant water that gave off a sour smell. But the real weight of it all eventually landed on Evan. After I left, he became the default caretaker by process of elimination. Grocery runs, pharmacy pickups, utility bills, downloading insurance forms, keeping an eye on Marjorie, chores he'd never had to think about before suddenly became his new normal. At first he acted like it was nothing. It's just a few errands, he shrugged. I'm not a kid. But it didn't take long for reality to sink in. He couldn't cook. He tried following a YouTube tutorial a few times, ended up burning the pan or boiling the chicken until it turned into shredded leather. He turned to take out, but Carl was impossible to please. Too greasy. Too bland. Too expensive. The father-son bickering started fast and turned vicious. They became like two hedgehogs, always bumping into each other's spines. Meals ended in silence, if not full-blown cold wars. The house grew heavy with that kind of exhaustion, where no one yelled anymore but no one laughed either. Just a stale haze of oil and medication, flickering lights, and a television left on with no one watching. Evan holed up in his room, staring blankly at his laptop. Couldn't write. Couldn't focus. Couldn't bring himself to reply to the editors he'd once begged for assignments. The only person he still talked to was Lily. Lily worked part-time at the town library. Smart, reserved, steady. They'd gone to middle school together and had been dating for almost a year now. One night, overwhelmed, he unloaded everything on her. The stress, the mess, the unending demands. But Lily didn't comfort him the way he expected. Instead, she fell silent. Then she said softly, "I remember when we were kids, your mom used to wait for you outside the library after school. She never called out or rushed you. Just stood there quietly and smiled when you finally came out." She paused. "My mom used to say your mother was the most polite, gentle woman she'd met. Said she always helped straighten the book corner while waiting, and she did it so neatly, like she really cared." Evan frowned. "So what?" Lily didn't flinch. "You keep calling her emotional and incapable, but the woman I saw growing up wasn't like that at all." She tilted her head. "And your dad? I don't remember ever seeing him at your school. Not once. Not at the library. Not even at our graduation. Every other kid had both parents there. Your mom sat alone in the back row." Her words hit like cold water over the head. He'd never thought about it like that. Never paused to ask if maybe, just maybe, his mother had once been composed, dignified, even admired. If maybe the woman he dismissed as irrational and passive had simply been worn down by decades of dismissal, burden, and neglect. Lily lowered her eyes and adjusted her scarf. "I'm not blaming you. She hesitated, then said, "I don't want to see you end up like your father, so convinced you're right that you ruin your life by never questioning yourself." She didn't break up with him. She didn't plead. She just looked at him and said, "You need to figure out who you want to be." Evan walked home alone that night, the wind slicing through his hoodie like ice. He jammed his hands into his pockets and felt something crumpled inside. It was a wrinkled grocery list. Marjorie's from that morning. He stopped walking. Stood there on the sidewalk under the flickering streetlight. And for the first time in years he remembered how I used to leave notes on the kitchen table before I left for errands. Little things. "We're low on eggs. Don't forget your dad's stomach meds." He'd never paid attention to them then. But now they returned in sharp, startling detail. The next morning he called me for the first time since the divorce filing. No yelling. No guilt. No blame. Just a single sentence. "Mom, I get it now. What you did all those years, it wasn't easy. You did it really well." I didn't respond. Because some words don't need replies. His sentence wasn't an apology. It was something harder, something more important. It was the first honest conversation he'd had with his own life. The first time he really saw the sacrifice I used to make. Carl's life, on the other hand, was unraveling by the day. When the court officially granted the divorce, his expression was the color of concrete. Dull, cold, and stiff. Kelsey handled everything with clean precision. I made no unreasonable demands. All I asked for was a fair division of assets and the return of a certain joint savings amount that had mysteriously disappeared from our accounts. Carl insisted the money had been spent long ago on shared household expenses. But when I laid out the bank statements and credit card records, something in his face cracked. Line by line, the truth was laid bare. Monthly charges at an upscale beauty spa, under Linda's name. A few Italian-made coats and designer handbags, purchased with Carl's secondary credit card. Even the annual membership fee for a boutique winery in another state, where one of Linda's old friends ran tastings and retreats, had come out of Carl's account. He'd actually believed these were shared household expenses. Linda had told him she was upgrading their home environment and treating herself occasionally after all her emotional labor. And he'd bought it, every word. But right after the court proceedings ended, Linda announced she had some matters to take care of out of state. She packed swiftly, left no note, not even a stray hair in the bathroom. Her exit was so seamless it was clear she'd planned it all along. On her way out, she even took the last jar of wild honey I'd left behind in the fridge. Carl panicked. Called her in a fury. "What the hell was I to you?" Linda chuckled, smooth as silk. "You didn't seem to mind when the card went through, Carl. You called it generous. You said it was voluntary, remember?" "You owe me," he shouted. She laughed again, lighter this time. "Then consider it tuition. Lesson learned." She hung up. And just like that she was gone, like she'd never existed. That was when it hit him. In Linda's world he had only ever been a layover. A stop between comfort and opportunity. He thought losing me meant freedom. Options. But what he found instead was someone sharper than him. Someone who knew how to clean out a man without even raising her voice. 2 months after the divorce, Carl moved out of the 2-story house we once called home. Marjorie was transferred to a senior care facility on the outskirts of town. Every so often she'd call him from there, complaining that no one came to visit, no one had time to sit and talk. But Carl had no energy to comfort her. He was barely holding himself up, drowning in his own mess. No one left to lean on. No one left to blame. And certainly no one left to clean it up. On my end, life had already settled into something steady, quiet but deeply mine. After the Etsy orders began coming in consistently, I followed Grace's suggestion and applied for a small apartment in the center of town. Just a 5-minute walk from her place. It wasn't big, just 1 bedroom and a living room, but the sunlight poured through the windows in the morning, warm and golden. By the window sat a wooden table I'd salvaged and sanded down myself, now repainted in soft cream tones. It had become my little workstation where I cut fabric, stitched orders, and sometimes just sat with a cup of tea and an open notebook. The curtains were handmade, patchworked together from scraps of old clothes I once thought I'd never wear again. The fridge always held a jar or 2 of my homemade jam, and the couch was dressed in throw pillows I'd sewn in warm amber hues. In the corner sat a small ledger book where I tracked sales, orders, and expenses. It wasn't grand, but it was my kingdom. Grace and I still shared a booth at the weekend craft market. Over time we fell into a rhythm, helping each other with displays, meeting fellow artisans, building a network of regular customers. Some came for the fabric table runners. Others placed custom bridal gift orders, telling me there was a kind of warmth in my work they couldn't find anywhere else. Some evenings I'd sit out on the small balcony with a cup of red tea, feeling the sun dip behind the rooftops. I'd listen to the neighbor's dog barking below, watch the family across the street eat dinner on their patio, their kids chasing each other around the fountain, laughter echoing like soft bells in the air. Simple, peaceful, free. A life I had never dared to imagine could belong to me. Evan started dropping by once in a while too, not with guilt weighing down his steps, but with a quiet respect that had taken root over time. He'd always text ahead now, "Would it be okay to stop by?" And when he came he brought small things. A box of cookies he'd baked himself or an old art book he'd found at the library. He no longer called me Mom like it was a claim. He said it like a title he now honored. Like I was someone whose presence needed to be earned. He'd sit on the edge of the sofa and ask, "Do you think this essay angle works?" Or, "Have you thought about a holiday theme for your shop?" Sometimes even, "I remember you once made a patchwork skirt. Want me to help look for the old fabric samples?" We no longer tried to play roles we'd outgrown. There were no debts to repay, no apologies waiting to be spoken. Just 2 people who had weathered a storm and now, side by side, were learning to walk again, this time with mutual respect. One day as he was leaving, he turned back at the door and said, "Mom, you look better than ever. I mean it. I'm really happy for you." I didn't say much. Just smiled, my heart full with the kind of pride that didn't need to be spoken aloud. It was enough to see him growing. I had no plans to fall in love again. No desire to be rescued. I had my craft. My work. A steady income. A friend who'd stood by me when I had nothing. And a son who was slowly, honestly learning how to see me for who I truly was. And that was more than enough.